Today we're going to be talking about protists. And protists are considered by many to be the first eukaryotes. Protists are really anything that is eukaryotic and is not a plant, an animal, or a fungi. And so if it's not a plant or an animal or fungi and it's eukaryotic, we put it into the protist kingdom. And that's really how diverse they are, is they've got their own kingdom, just like the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and so on. These organisms are, as I mentioned, incredibly diverse. We're going to talk about their diversity. We're going to talk about the features that make them unique, and also some of the features that they share with other organisms. They do share some features with organisms, which is why many scientists believe that a lot of current organisms actually developed from protists. We see some features in protists, and then we see some features in plants, for example, or we see some features in protists and we see those same features in animals or even fungi. And so we think that a lot of our modern organisms, plants and animals and fungi, owe their kind of development to this group of protists. The protists are very, very diverse. Modern studies are going to group protists into 6 different major clades, and so we'll take a look at some of those. Protists, one of the ways we can divide up protists is by how they move. Amoeboid movement is through changing their shape. So if you have a protist, it would literally, it's going to have a shape like this, for example, and then it's just going to extend its cytoplasm, right? And just change its shape like that. And so it's just kind of squished together, and it can move just by changing the shape like an amoeba, right? And so hence the name, the amoeboid. So first, a projection or bulge forms on the side of the cell. Okay, so this would start to extend here. Projection is called a pseudopod. And the interesting thing about a pseudopod is, if you know your Greek or your Latin, pseudo means false and pod means foot. So we're talking about a fake foot. Okay, or a false foot. So that it fills then with cytoplasm, and eventually the rest of the cell follows and causes the cell to move. So again, we would have this pseudopod extend out here, and it's extending here, and then all of the cell just kind of follows slowly behind it. This movement is powered by actin, which is also found in our muscle cells. They can also move with cilia or flagella. Cilia are short little hairs, so they have short little hairs that extend off of or away from the body of the protist, and they're going to be on every side, so they can just kind of move to give the cell movement. They could also have flagella, which are tails like we find in human sperm, and those whip-like tails can cause the cell to move in one particular direction or another. It propels them along. They can also move passively through the air, through water, the currents in either, or through other organisms carrying them. So they're very, very small, they're microscopic, so they can be picked up by one organism unintentionally, and they can move around that way. So they have a lot of different ways that they become mobile. Protists are going to form reproductive cells, which are called spores. And from those spores, they can reproduce asexually or sexually. Amoebas and other protists reproduce by mitosis. So we go back to our amoeboid movement, right? The amoebas are simply going to divide in half, and that creates 2 daughter cells. So just like what we see with mitosis in our cells, one cell becomes 2. This is an asexual form of reproduction because you only have one parent, and so each cell that is created is going to be a clone of the first cell, right? With just one cell becoming 2 cells, no sexual variation, no genetic variation in that process. Some protists can produce sexually, where they alternate phases of diploid and haploid sets of genetic material. When the male and female gametes come together, the nuclei fuse, and that forms the diploid zygote. So again, because of their diversity within the kingdom, it just depends on what type of protist you're talking about and which method it's going to take advantage of. Conjugation is a process where 2 organisms exchange genetic information. This is not reproduction. So because after the material is swapped, the cells go through mitosis. The paramecium have 2 types of nuclei. the macronucleus and the micronucleus. During conjugation, the cells exchange haploid micronuclei, where the micronuclei then fuse and reproduce. So it's a little bit different than what we see, but again, we're talking about organisms that are different from us and different from a lot of the organisms that we're most familiar with. So the processes by which they make copies of themselves are going to be a little bit different. We have autotrophic protists, which get their energy from the sun by photosynthesizing. So another way that they can be diverse. We're going to find these guys living on ponds or as seaweed in the ocean. Some are phytoplankton that live near the top of the water. Red and brown algae, euglenas, dinoflagellates. These are all photosynthetic protists. And so again, very, very wide ranging, making up a big portion of what we see in a lot of aquatic ecosystems. They form the base of most food chains in both marine and freshwater ecosystems, right? Because what the smallest organisms are going to be feeding on are these microscopic photosynthetic organisms. They are the base of the food chain. If you think about in open waters in the ocean where you don't have plants that can anchor themselves to the ground because the ground's too deep for the light to penetrate, a lot of times you can have these floating organisms on the surface, and that again starts the basis of the food chain, the small, tiny, even little larger microscopic organisms feeding on them. Because again, when they're photosynthetic, they are producers, and we know that producers are the only ones that can start those food chains, whether they're photosynthetic or chemosynthetic. But these guys are going to be photosynthesizers. If you're not photosynthetic, that means you have to be heterotrophic, okay? Heterotrophic protists get their food from other organisms just like all other consumers. Amoebas are going to feed by surrounding a cell or food particle, and then they fold that into a food vacuole. So it's just a little storage container where it's going to get digested. So if you look at an amoeba, it's going to have this shape, and it may say, oh, here's a little piece of food. It's actually going to change as it moves, so it's going to move that direction. It's going to move its cytoplasm, almost like Pac-Man style, around this food molecule. And it's going to continue to move in that direction until it gets the food inside of it, and then it's going to form this little vacuole, and it's going to digest it right inside there. So it basically just wraps its whole body around the food molecule and brings it inside. Ciliates, another group, they're going to sweep their food into their gullet, which is a dent in one side of the organism. Slime molds live in damp places that are rich in dead organic matter and live as decomposers. So we've covered the whole board here. You've got producers as protists, you've got protists as consumers and heterotrophs, and then you've got protists that are also decomposers. So any which way you can get food or make food, protists have it covered. We've also got a lot of symbiotic protists that have mutualistic or perhaps parasitic relationships with other organisms. Termites eat wood, but they cannot digest the cellulose that makes up the wood. So they have a protist that lives in their gut, and that protist is able to digest the wood for them because it is capable of digesting the wood because it releases enzymes that no other animal can release to break down that cellulose. Some protists are parasitic and they cause disease. African sleeping sickness is caused by a protist. Trypanosoma is the one that causes that illness. It destroys blood cells and can infect other tissues. Malaria is caused by Plasmodium that is carried by a species of mosquito, and that lays the gametes of the protist and infects the organism that is bitten. So, malaria has killed more people than just about anything else on the planet combined as far as human history is concerned, as malaria is a big one. So the protists are incredibly diverse, as you've seen, both in the way that they move, the way that they reproduce, the way that they get food or perhaps make food. All of this makes protists a very large and very diverse kingdom. And again, it's because we kind of lump organisms. We say, okay, it's not a plant, it's not a fungi, it's not an animal, but it's, eukaryotic. All right, it's a protist. And so by lumping all of these and just kind of throwing all of these individuals into this category, you wind up with a very large, very diverse kingdom known as protist. I'll see you next time.